Hey there. Welcome to the Eurostep, a Milwaukee Bucks podcast, proudly a part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and GSPN, and presented by our pals at PrizePicks. More on them later. Rohan Kadi is on his annual vacation to the Oak Creek Mire. My guest probably doesn't get that joke. I'm Ty Windisch. I'm joined by Justin Garcia of the Bucks Radio Network and the Locked On Bucks podcast. Justin, I asked you when we first got on the call here. I know the answer probably isn't what it would usually be on a lovely wintry morning in Wisconsin when we get to do a pod together, but how's it going, sir?
It's great.
I'm hitting you with a tough question right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, why? Should it be going poorly? Is there something I'm missing?
Yeah, so the Bucks sit at 9-13. They lost a game where it was one of those where it was so bad. I don't know if anyone else does this. This may be, people may hate that I do this, but in that fourth quarter, when the Bucks are making mistake after mistake in Washington against the Wizards.
You started doing lottery simulators?
No, I didn't start doing lottery simulators. I see the screenshots, though. I won't do it myself, but every time I see one where it's like one of the two picks is first and the other one is fourth, I'm like, wow, that would be nice.
We can work with that.
Yeah, okay, all right. That's a silver lining. When the Bucks play poorly enough against a bad team, I'm like, I hope they do lose because this is one you should have to wear. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I hope CJ McCollum and Chris Middleton, bless his heart, do hit all of these shots. And they did. And the Wizards did win 129-126. Yeah. Because, like, sometimes you don't deserve to win a game. And it's almost like, and this is stupid. I don't know if it matters to the Bucks decision makers or players. But, like, you don't even want them coming out of the game like, oh, we found a way to win. Like, we did that. No, you didn't. You really didn't find a way to win. The Wizards found a way to lose for the 17th time in 19 games, or whatever it was, but they didn't. They won. The Wizards got their third win of the year. Middleton was good. McCollum was a flamethrower. Marvin Bagley, the third, had 22 and 8, which is a huge problem. Out-rebounded every single Milwaukee Buck. And here the Bucks are, firmly in 11th in the Eastern Conference. So, I mean, Justin, going into this game, were you as confident as I was? Because I did a post like Alex Sarr is out. The Wizards just have no bigs. They can't guard Giannis. And I will say, I think this is going to be mostly a negative Bucks podcast. Those guys did a great job guarding Giannis. The Wizards got they had a game plan. The guys fought. They were physical, everything else. But I was pretty confident coming in that this would be a inspiring 2-game winning streak over the Nets and Wizards, the worst two teams in the East. And it was not.
Well, first of all, is 2 games a winning streak, or is that just consecutive wins and the streak is 3?
When you lost,
I'm only asking. I'm not saying one way or another. I expected them to win last night, and we talked about it on the radio, on Locked On too. Like, there are no must-win games when you're a quarter of the way through the season and we're not even at Christmas yet. But like, this is a can't lose game, shouldn't lose this game against the Wizards because of the stretch you just came out of. And like, you need to just piece together, as Mike McCarthy used to say, let's stack successes here and go into a tougher stretch of scheduling. So I was probably as guilty as anyone of overlooking the Wizards and saying, well, they're down all these guys. And like, they got KPJ back. Who would have thought we'd be really hanging our hats on that in February of last year? They should win this game. I expect them to win this game. And, you know, the first half, you were like, oh, this is ugly, but like, so I guess we're just going to win ugly here. Third quarter, when you got up 16, you felt like, all right, here it is.
Yeah, there we go.
And then it was just like gone immediately. And I think we've seen enough, really, the last 3 years to know the way that fourth quarter was unfolding. You had this pit in your stomach. And then when KPJ went out, I think we all kind of recognized, I don't think they're going to win this game. And of course, leave it to CJ McCollum and Chris Middleton to do them in with some of those. You know, I agree with your sentiment to start that like some of these you do have to wear, and it's like we're not going to reward bad behavior with wins here either. That it makes you be much more introspective, and you know, like this should be a come to Jesus meeting of sorts of like, look, how does this continue to happen? And it almost feels like this year is that larger picture from the basketball gods of we are not rewarding your bad behavior anymore because of how many games they've had the shooting advantage and lost. Last night, They were one of 7 teams in NBA history to hit 21 threes, shoot 55% from 3, and still lose that game. They lost to the Kings earlier this year when they shot, 60% in that game. They are the number 3 field goal percentage team, and I think they're 4 in effective field goal percentage. All of the teams in the top 10 are the elite teams in the league. And then you have the Bucks, who have won 40% of their games. They are the outlier there. So
they're first in effective field goal percentage per NBA stats. They're 0.1 higher than Denver. Great. So literally, when they shoot, that no team is more efficient.
It's going in,
and they're 9-13.
And I mean, so in terms of the bad behavior, I don't know where you're at on this, but when we came into the season, there was all the conversation seemingly centered around who's going to be the small forward and who's going to defend those bigger wings. I never even considered, just because of this team's history, is this going to impact their rebounding at all? And I mean, what we've seen, and I've seen people who have reached out to me too and saying, well, this is just teams have figured out how to defend 3-point shooting. No, it's not that teams have figured out how to defend 3-point shooting. It just means 3-point shooting isn't all you need to win anymore. If you're going to continue to give your opponent more opportunities, they are going to beat you. If the Bucks were getting offensive rebounds and they're the number 1 effective field goal percentage team in the league, 22 games into the season right now, they'd probably be 18-4 or better.
Yeah. Yeah, or if they could get defensive rebounds and not let the other team. They aren't doing either right now, and they're turning the ball over, and they're fouling and not getting into the foul line, and it's been just pretty apparent that they're behind the curve. So, they prioritize shooting every summer. Which is
funny, too. That's good because we thought they finally got in front of
they caught up. Or at least caught up. I mean, Indiana, of course, was first. And kind of, OKC is kind of just what if we did Indiana stuff, but all of our players were awesome instead of 2 of them being awesome? It's apparently the answer to that is you just win every game, is what we're seeing so far. But it was for every year since, I don't know when, probably the summer after Greg Monroe, it was shooting. We need shooting around Giannis. And I think we all kind of realized late bud, okay, we've probably over-indexed shooting a little bit. We probably need a little bit more. But I mean, I look back now and I was man, the stuff we were complaining about, oh man, first in the East and losing in the first round with Giannis kind of hurt. That really sucks. And that would be a dream season at this point, unfortunately, based on what's transpired since.
They've lost 4 in a row, and they're currently 31-13. We got big problems here.
Oh, man, the last game before the All-Star break in Memphis, and they didn't bring it. This is embarrassing. Let's fire everybody.
By the way, the record that I threw out was probably a bad choice because wasn't that the record when one coach was fired? That's not what I'm hinting at.
No. But the shooting. And that was, starting 2015-ish when Steph Curry Warriors, that was the thing. Everyone realized we need shooting, and guys who couldn't shoot kind of just either disappeared unless they were elite at something else. But now and then this year it was okay, we're going to be more athletic, starting really at the Kuzma-Middleton trade and everything else. We've got to be faster, we're just getting ran out of the gym. And they're still not super athletic. With Kevin Porter Jr. and they feel a lot more athletic, which we'll talk about him and how good he looked, his 30-point performance, and there it goes, out with back spasms, missed the end of the game, and I don't think we don't have any insight on that yet. I know the Bucks haven't put out an official.
They haven't put anything out. They don't have any availability today. I think they might practice, but he did media availability last night, and I was told that he looked fine and looked pretty good walking around, which could mean anything. Anybody that's dealt with back spasms or any type of back issues would be the first to tell you, yeah, great, he looks good after the game. How is he going to feel tomorrow or 2 days later is a different story potentially.
Yeah. Not ideal because he really did look sensational. And the lineup played really well. I want to get into all that, but they got more athletic, certainly more athletic. Dame, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez all in the same starting 5 with Taurean Prince as Taurean Prince is the springy, bouncy perimeter guy. Get well soon, Taurean Prince. His presence is missed right now, but that is he's not PJ Washington or whatever else. That's just not. He's not Derrick Jones Jr. And even if he was, that's still, look at the Clippers right now. The Bucks did kind of get out of the way of being way too old and slow, which really does not work anymore. But now the new thing this year, I mean, you could talk about Miami and like less pick and rolls, whatever. That I don't think their offense is not as what's important, but it's the possession game. That's what everyone's talking about. It's like we don't need to be the best offense in the half court. We can just get more attempts and like, physical defense. OKC fouls a good deal, but they just have more possessions because they're really good defensively and they're big and they steal the ball. But the rebounding has been a huge thing. So Detroit, which is I think still number 1 in the East, and Houston, which is number 3 in the West, which is quite an accomplishment considering who's 2 and 1, or maybe they're 2 now, whatever. We know they're not number 1. They just rebound everything. Houston even more, but Detroit too. And it turns out those looks are so efficient that it makes up for it. And the Bucks are, I think, around middle of the pack in offensive rating, so points per 100 possessions or per possession, whatever. You can use either, despite being number 1 in effective field goal percentage because they just don't have the possessions. They don't get the total points that these other teams are getting, and the Bucks are really far behind. They are like bottom in almost every rebounding category despite having Giannis. And it's better when he plays, but it's still not been good enough, clearly, based on their overall ranks. And they're suddenly super behind the curve again, and I just think we're seeing they haven't figured out what to do about this yet. And I think some of it is for as maligned as he was, and clearly, they had to do something. He's just gotten old. I think the Clippers are feeling that too.
Yeah.
Brook Lopez, though, we're still good at boxing out. You don't need to be fast. Like, he gave up some offensive rebounds that annoyed people, but in the aggregate, every season, they were really good defensive rebounding with him on because he's just big and he gets in the way. Yeah. Miles Turner doesn't do it. And they're smaller as well, to your point earlier. And this new lineup's been really good against the Nets and Wizards. I'm interested to see, can they rebound with Kevin Porter Jr., Ryan Rollins, AJ Green, Giannis, Miles Turner? My guess would be no when they play real teams. Hopefully we get to see. Hopefully KPJ is fine. Detroit will be a great test tomorrow if he is in that front. But I think, they started Kuzma. Now they're not starting Kuzma. I think they're a little worried about the spacing with KPJ, Rollins, Kuzma, although KPJ is shooting the cover off the ball and Rollins is a good shooter. Yeah. I'm not sure. I just said a lot of things, Justin, but what do you think about this idea that, like, suddenly, again, the Bucks are – I don't know if they have the most firm identity outside of just hit threes, and they've done that, and it still has not been enough. To your point, too, I mean, they're lacing threes against bad teams and losing. Like, clearly they need their identity to be more than Giannis opens up threes and gets 30, because that's not really working for them.
Yeah, and, I mean – Doc said too, I think this was before the Nets game, that when KPJ came back, he was talking about their lineups and kind of asked about, like, well, what is your group going forward? And seemed to indicate there isn't one, that they're still kind of searching for that. And I think he said, we feel like we have 4 guys that we know are going to start. And then that 5th could be one of, I think he said 3 guys potentially, which I'm assuming the 4 guys are Giannis, Miles Turner, KPJ, and Ryan Rollins. I do wonder if against the Pistons you see Kyle Kuzma back in the starting lineup because of the rebounding factor and because, quite frankly, it's an extremely small sample size. And I didn't even pull up the numbers to see what it was, but just going off the eye test, it seemed like the trio of KPJ, Giannis, and Kyle Kuzma seems to fit because KPJ is getting Giannis easy buckets. Kuzma's getting out in transition. You have some pretty good length and defense with that group, enough to offset everything else. That, sure, you have spacing concerns, but to your point, I think, what I've had to kind of re-examine is what you mentioned earlier, that, like, I don't know that shooting is the end-all be-all anymore. Like, you just can't put out a non-shooter, and there's still a conversation to be had on Kyle Kuzma there. I know he's been on a bit of a hot stretch lately, but teams are going to leave him alone in big spots. But everything else that you're doing is equally important, and Kyle Kuzma does that stuff. So I wonder if we see another shift in the starting lineup, but the troubling stuff, and I think it's telling that we saw Jericho Sims playing 18 minutes last night and have kind of ramped up his minutes, because Doc mentioned this, I think, before that same game when he had a rather, by his standards, testy exchange with Eric Name that I was talking about with Eric afterwards, where it felt like Doc Rivers just kind of said, stop asking me about offensive rebounding. I'm sick of answering that question and pointed to the defense and everything else, right?
Yeah.
But said, like, it's not just size. Like, you have to have guys that are good at offensive rebounding, and teams either have them or they don't, which, like, okay, fair. But I don't think there's only select teams that have offensive rebounders in the league anymore. And we're seeing it go up quite a bit across the league. He mentioned Jericho Sims and Andre Jackson Jr. is like, these are two guys I would probably say are our best at it. But if we play them, we're sacrificing a lot with shooting and defense. And kind of jokingly said, if I do that, then you're going to say, well, why aren't you playing AJ Green more? Which, sure, fair. But I think at this point, we're kind of at the state where let's try it and let's see what this does. And if this is the thing that kickstarts this team, because the numbers are just so jarring that we mentioned where they're at in effective field goal percentage and overall field goal percentage. But like, if you just look at the four factors this year versus last year, it is quite frankly stunning that they are as elite as they are at shooting the basketball and cannot do anything else well. Like, they're still better than league average in turnover rate, which continues to really perplex me because it feels like the eye test would tell you otherwise. But dead last in offensive rebounding, dead last in free throw rate. I still think they're dead last in free throw percentage by a wide margin. On the defensive end, there's nothing they're doing well, right? They're basically a bottom 10 team in every one of those four categories. In opponent effective field goal percentage, they're not forcing turnovers. They're not a good defensive rebounding team. And I'm quite frankly surprised that they're 25th in free throw rate and not 30th.
They are last in free throw percentage, 4 points behind the Wizards, who they, of course, just lost to. To your point earlier about the lineups, I've just been tracking this one with Kuzma of just all Kuzma-Giannis minutes together because, to your point, they've used so many different groups. Like, I think the Porter, Kuzma, Giannis lineup, it's going to be like 2 minutes or something. Like, they just have not played together because KPJ has played, 40 minutes or whatever? No, more because he played the other game. But, not many minutes. Giannis and Kuzma in 161 minutes have a net rating of plus 22 so far. They're like plus 70 something in some in 161 minutes. The team is only 8-7 in those games, which is a lot better than 9-13. But when those two have played together, the Bucks have been really good. And I think we saw the best. I'm trying to remember what the game was, but Kuzma just kept cutting when Giannis was in the post. And it was like, okay, they figured this out, right? Like, to your point, I don't think you can just have him sit in the corner and be like, we're going to run Rollins, Giannis, KPJ, Giannis, Giannis, AJ, pick and rolls, inverted pick and rolls, all this fun stuff. And Kuz will just space because they're going to ignore him. And some days he'll be hot, but some days he won't. And I just think you look at his career, I don't really want to play those numbers of like our crunch time success comes down to whether Kuz hits the three. Not even trying to be disrespectful to Kuz. History tells us probably not based on his overall shooting percentages. But okay, we're getting Giannis in the post. We're moving off ball. Maybe Kuz is setting screens and then cutting to the rim. And it's like, suddenly that's a lot to deal with because you probably have your biggest, most physical players worried about Giannis. Now you have another big 6'10"-ish guy cutting toward the rim who for his career has been a very good finisher. That's a lot. Plus, you're still spacing with shooters. And they did it one game and they really haven't done it since. Like the very next game, it was Kuzma back to the corner. And maybe it was a matchup thing. Maybe it's the way teams are playing them. But we really haven't almost seen it at all since then. Some of it is Giannis went out and just got back. And they haven't been starting Kuzma since he got back. But I think they need to investigate that more. I think Kuzma just probably has to start until those numbers turn sideways because the other starting groups haven't been great. That said, again, the group with the two point guards, Green, Turner, Giannis, does have a really strong net rating or plus minus, whatever you want to say, so far through these two games. But they lost one of the games. And again, it was the Nets and the Wizards, who are the two worst teams in the conference. If KPJ is active, I think we'll get a much better representation of that against Detroit on Wednesday. I just think we're going to take a quick break and then want to talk about how dire do you think this situation is and how dire the vibes are, which is two different questions. things may not be great right now. We'll continue that conversation with Justin Garcia in just a moment. But first, there is some great news. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, where we all make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this basketball season on PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. Rohan and I play all the time. We've been having success with our flex plays recently. I personally like looking at AJ Green made threes, whether it's 2.5 or 3.5. The more than has been a good option. Also with Kevin Porter Jr. strong play. If he's healthy, his points and assist numbers and rebounds and even steals could be viable as well. If you've never played before, now's the perfect time to start because PrizePicks is simple. All you do is pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. And PrizePicks now offers stacks, meaning you can pick the same player up to 3 times in the same lineup. If you want to pick more on Giannis Antetokounmpo's points, rebounds, and assists, you can get all of them in the same lineup only on PrizePicks. And PrizePicks offers injury reboots, which is a great feature. If one of your players leaves the game in the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks won't count it as a loss. It is simply the best way to win cash this basketball season. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code EUROSTEP to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code EUROSTEP to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup, or just use the link in the description. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. Okay, so how bad are things right now? Obviously, the national media, which actually, I shouldn't say obviously, surprisingly, like I keep flipping through, like, listening to a couple of Ringer pods, the Hoop Collective, and waiting for the, like, oh my God, red alert, the Bucks are a disaster. And kind of like, yeah, it's been pretty bad without Giannis. We all kind of thought so. Like, we'll see what happens there. I was like, oh, that's nice. If they keep losing, like this Wizards game, it will obviously get a lot worse, as it probably should. But how bad is this situation for the Bucks in terms of, like, can they right the ship this season? The obvious long-term big guy question is always going to be a little bit in everyone's minds, and probably a lot bit with, like, the way the game last night went, if stuff like that continues to happen, where I don't think Giannis played his best game down the stretch either. Like, does this just feel bad? Did they play down against their opponents, like they just lost a random game to the Wizards? Or is this actually a precarious spot? What do you think?
All the above. I think, like, Giannis, you brought it up. Giannis was not good last night. That was, I think, by his standards, the worst game we've seen him play this year and the worst game we've seen him play in a decent amount of time. Now, coming back from that injury a lot quicker than we thought, I'm sure there is going to be some fatigue and other things to get your conditioning back, sure.
Yeah.
But Giannis wasn't good against the Wizards, and that was a big part of it. I mean, we talked with Doc about this before the Nets game. Funny, because you thought it was for weather purposes and saying, like, how do you keep your team focused when this is going to be a weird game? You got a bad team coming in. I didn't expect there to be very many people in the arena. I was surprised there were as many as there were. And Doc's point then was, we have a 7-game losing streak. So, like, that's how you keep them focused, and that paid off. But then you fast forward to 48 hours later, and you see basically the same scenario against a team that had won 2 games. And it did feel like you were battling that in your mindset too, of like, this is the Wizards. We can show up and beat them. So that part was disappointing for a team that knows we have to start to make up ground here, and we have to take advantage of all of these types of games on our schedule. How dire it is, I think, I'm not going to dismiss anything in the past where you would look at last year at the 2-8 start. We were talking about this before we recorded. Like, when you were 2-8, you looked at it and you were kind of surprised, where you're like, I don't believe them to be this bad. Am I missing something here? And, they started to figure it out as the season went on. Here, because a lot of pieces have changed and they're playing differently, I don't think any of us can sit here and honestly say, like, I know for a fact this is not who this team is. I think it remains to be seen. That's the tough part, that we have to figure that out. This month of December is going to tell you a lot, because you start to it lets up in terms of the schedule compared to what you had in November. I think they have 14 games this month. November was brutal, so it was like the least opportune time to lose Giannis for 5 games. But to be clear, it wasn't just they were bad because Giannis missed 5 games in November. They were bad with him on the floor too. But in December, you have 4 instances of at least 2 days off in between games. The teams on your schedule start to go down a little bit. You still have the Pistons on there 2 more times, the Sixers, the Timberwolves are on there. You got the Raptors, but you have more of those teams that are either bad or in the middle that you, at this point, have to beat up on. So how dire this is, I think we'll know by the end of December, because if they don't, at least get to think about where Indiana was last year when the Bucks beat them on New Year's Eve. They were dealing with injuries to some of their key guys early in that stretch, and I think they were a game below 500, somewhere around there, going into the new year. If you don't at least get this in that direction where you say, okay, we're not where we need to be, but we've played much better in December and we feel like we're finding some things here, we're going to start to take off in the second half. If it's not there, and if we get to the end of December and they were 9-12 coming into November, and I think they got 14 games. So if you're 15-20, something like that, then I think it's starting to get pretty late, pretty early for this team, because the separation has started to take place. When Giannis went out, everything was still pretty bunched up, but now, I think we can all confidently, you're not catching Detroit with what the start they've gotten off to, the hole that you've dug for yourself. All these other teams have started to kind of settle in 1 through 4 or 5. And all of a sudden, before you know it, the middle of that pack and the teams that are towards the end of the playoffs, the top 2 play-in teams, you're already 4 or 5 games back in the loss column from those teams. So if you don't get this to 500-ish by the end of December, then I do think it gets very dire.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it does just feel... It's been a weird season because I feel like there's been very brief moments where you're like, oh, I get it. I see what the
first 5 games of the season.
The first 5 games, and then, I thought they had good moments against New York and Miami, even without Giannis, and just couldn't get it done, which is frustrating. But both of those games, you kind of came out like, that sucks. The New York one, I think, especially with Giannis back, but it was all right, they hung in there against
they were competitive,
real teams.
And they looked,
And then there's this Wizards game, and then there's the Portland game with, again, no Giannis, but a team Kings on the second night of a back-to-back. The Kings game with Giannis, there's there's 13 losses. We could probably go on for a while here.
Well, and that's the other thing is even the Rockets game, you controlled for large portions. And that was, again, where you shoot yourself in the foot is injuries are going to happen and guys are going to miss time. So you can't put yourself in that spot that if they took control, if they took care of business in that Rockets game, if they didn't show up the way they did against the Kings, a handful of these other games where instead of being just a game or two above 500 and 8-5, instead of being there, if you're 10-3 because you won 2 of those other games, you have a lot more room to say, okay, we're going to miss Giannis for 4 games. Even if things go south, we're still in a good spot, but you just didn't afford yourself that.
It'd be 500. I mean, if they had beat Houston and Sacramento or whichever 2 you want to pick there, and then you're like, okay, they're 10th, they're 2 in the loss column back from 6th. I mean, the Cavs are 13-9. But I'm glad you mentioned the injuries because that's been something you can't blame them too much. They've had all these injuries, and with Giannis out, I think sure, it's still. Obviously, they were right there with Philly. I think that Portland game was winnable. Miami, they were right there. They probably could have gotten a win in other scenarios, or if play those games 100 times or whatever. But you don't play the games. You play the games once each, and you just got to win the first one. But even on the whole, you look up the East, everybody's got injuries. I mean, Boston is 11-9. They haven't had Jason Tatum all year, and they got rid of 4 other key players. They're 2 games above 500. Philly. I mean, I don't even have to start naming players. We all know.
Who's out with Philly?
Who's not? Atlanta has not had Trae Young. Suddenly they're better. That's a whole different story. Cleveland never has.
Detroit, think about how many games Detroit has played without their backcourt, and they're still rolling through it.
And they're number 1. New York doesn't have OG Anunoby right now. They're on a 4-game winning streak. Miami just got Tyler Hero back. The Raptors haven't had RJ Barrett. They've looked a little shaky since, but they're 14-7. They had Pirtle out for a couple games, and they love him. They gave him $1 billion. Orlando never has all their guys healthy. It's like the whole East. It's like, everyone's missing someone. I think Stan Van Gundy made this point. I think about Cleveland of like, this is the NBA these days. You're never going to have all 18 guys or 15 or whatever. You're never going to have your full rotation for long. And the Bucks have certainly lived that, and it sucks, but that's just life right now. And they're still 2-8 in their last 10. 2-8. Jesus, 2-8 in their last 10. So it just kind of is what it is, and you just have to find ways to win, or you don't. I just think. So I want to talk about the vibe, because you mentioned the 2-8 last year, and the vibe with us in the media was like, don't think it's this bad. Although they have kind of always, I think, had this cavalier, so to speak, attitude with some of the winnable games, like the 2-8 start, their home opener against Chicago. They just got ran out of the gym and embarrassing. It's like, how in your home opener is energy low? Like that should never.
And then how
happen.
do you do the same thing 2 days later
in Brooklyn? Which they got embarrassed in that game. And I remember at the start, we're like, this is a different team. They're not doing that. And here we are against the Wizards, so they're not that different. But within the team, you're kind of around the team more on the Zooms and in the building, everything else. Does it feel different? Because I remember very clearly thinking like this is going to be a disaster when they're 2-8, 1-8, whatever it was, and Doc was like, we know we're a playoff team, and all the players too. Every time they spoke about it was like, I mean, this sucks. Like teams have these runs. Ours happened to be early, but we'll be fine. And to their credit, they went and won 48 games that year. Does it feel any different coming now in December, hitting this point?
Well, I'm going to be curious like this week.
Yeah.
Because, up until because I haven't been there around them, obviously, in the last 2 days with them being on the road. And up until then, I would say like, it feels kind of like last year that there doesn't seem to be a sense of panic. The only unique thing is, part of, I think that steadfast confidence last year was they had a lot of veterans that were like, we've seen this, like we know how to get through this. We're not worried. When you think about the voice of Dame and Giannis, and then behind the scenes, Brooke and those, everybody's favorite, and Chris, those types of guys, it's just Giannis now. Like Giannis and Bobby are the veterans in Miles Turner, but like that's it in terms of guys that have been with this group. It's Giannis and Bobby Portis. So I am curious to see how you navigate through those stretches with some young guys. And I part of you is inclined to think like, well, young guys just don't know any better, that it's kind of a good thing. But the other part of it is you had this group that had developed and curated this winning culture for 7 years. And it just like, you don't have that now. You have young guys that weren't a part of that are trying to build their own thing, and you don't want a losing mentality to set in. So I think if anything, that's where the urgency would come from, to say like, this is not the brand of basketball that we have tried to subscribe to here for a decade now, basically. Like we got to right this ship, and it's going to be on young guys to take that leadership voice, because like everything can't be Giannis will rescue us. And I think, you think about the story that Ryan Rollins has become, how much we've talked about the importance of Kevin Porter Jr. Like those things are going to need to increase. And guys like Kyle Kuzma, they're going to have to become those types of guys that say, guys, we're not doing this anymore. We're playing differently. We're going to halt this. So this week, I think, will be very telling, too, with the games that they have, with 3 games yet this week, 2 of them against the Pistons, the Sixers, who are in front of you in the standings, that it's a team you felt like coming into the year, we should be a better team than the Sixers. And right now you're not. So how you handle this week, and when we talked about how dire it is and talked about the month of December, I think like that applies here, but especially this week, to see how do things go. And if it keeps going south and all of a sudden we're talking about a 4-game losing streak, what are the vibes like then when this starts to set in, if you are, God forbid, 9-16 on the season? Because then all of a sudden that becomes like, boy, this is starting to feel like what Philly was looking at last year before they ultimately realized, like, let's reset this for next year. Yeah.
And I think pretty obviously, going back to the whole concept of a gap year way before this past offseason, feels like the Bucks don't feel like they can afford that. in terms of cachet with the big guy. I mean, John Horst has been very aggressive. Maybe he would have always been no matter what.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think if Giannis goes in and says, like, hey, I get it. Like, let's ride out the Dame thing and, take a year, get a draft pick, everything else. Maybe things are different that summer. Who knows? Who knows? Perhaps they are, perhaps not. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the Detroit game. To your point earlier, you can't call that a must-win. Detroit is too good and it's too early. But I do think it's a must-fight. Like, I do think if you're down 30 in the third quarter against Detroit, I think things could really unravel quickly. And I think we know if you're staggered, the Sixers, and really mainly Tyrese Maxey, can jump on top of that because we've seen it, and the Bucks clearly don't have an answer for him. Maybe having KPJ back will help, maybe not. But you got to write this thing. That doesn't mean you always have to beat Detroit. I think they can. It's possible that they beat Detroit. They won however many consecutive games, like 15 out of 16 or something, which, by the way, I think Detroit's always going to play hard against the Bucks because they've been the little brother getting beat up for the entirety of the Giannis era. But you got to at least be competent and in that game, I think, which is a low bar, but that's where we are. So with the things they're not doing well, the rebounding, the defense, those are
maybe
the turnovers.
You should list what they are doing well.
Yeah, the shooting. They're shooting well. That's good. From three, not from free throw. What do you think there are real ways that Doc and the staff here can improve these things? To me, there's no lineup. I mean, you're not going to do Bobby, Kuzma, Sims, Giannis, Turner, right? Now we're going to be the rebounding team. Like, that's obviously not real. They're not going to be the best defensive or offensive rebounding team in the league. Can they get closer? Like, do you see things where you're like, I think, is it Kuzma starting? Is it just playing differently? Is it trying to go after boards more? Like, because everyone wants to talk trade. That's the most fun thing. We're 2 weeks away from most of the league even being trade eligible, including a lot of the guys I think people on the Bucks would want to trade. So in the meantime, you still have to play these games. What do you think are you looking at and saying, I think they should try this? Because I think, let me know if you disagree. I don't think there is anything where I'm like, this is going to fix them. They do this and suddenly they're going to be the 58-win team again. I think we're too far from that. But is there anything that you've ID'd as like, we need to, let's lean into this more?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is make free throws and play better defense. But like, what do they have on the roster to fix that, to your point? I don't think there is a smoking gun. I think at this point, offense is great, but as we mentioned, look at where you are in your efficiency and look at what your record is and look at all the other outliers. Like when you go to cleaning the glass and see those four factors in every other number and you see like, wow, that is bright orange. And then everything else is blue and in the bottom 10 with the league. That's the troubling part where you look at it and say, well, what is offense getting us here? That it's keeping us in games that we ultimately lose, I suppose. So I wonder, like I mentioned, we've seen more from Jericho Sims. Does that become a constant? Because he was active on the glass again last night with 7 rebounds, and I think 4 of them were offensive. Does that become a constant where it's 20 minutes that Jericho Sims is getting, and then who is that eating into? I think there's been some criticisms, and I think it's some of it is warranted too. Of like, how are we utilizing Miles Turner, and what is his role, and what are the minutes that he's playing? Doc talked about the aggressive version of Miles that we saw against the Miami Heat, and like that's what we want to see. Saw flashes of it again against the Knicks, and then it just kind of disappeared. So like, I still think they're figuring out how to utilize that front court, but I think what everybody would point to, like the only obvious fix is like, we'll just play guys that aren't being played right now. So like keep playing Jericho Sims and play Andre Jackson Jr. to really reinvigorate the defense, I suppose. But yeah, that's the tough part is there's no like, we'll just wait for this guy to come back, or we'll just do this and switch the lineup to this. I mean, I think you kind of have to switch it to Kyle Kuzma for some of the numbers that we talked about earlier. And even the Kuz, I don't take anything from the Kuz, even though I said, hey, the eye test looks pretty good. The numbers say it wasn't with Kuz, KPJ, and Giannis on the floor, but it was like 10 possessions that we've seen so far. But Giannis, Kuz, and Ryan Rollins have been really elite together too. Yeah. So I think that's the big part is, all right, Kuz has to start. And for your point about trades too, like that's the other tough part is everybody has concocted deals that include Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis and, maybe this player and a first-round pick for this. I mean, number one, I don't know what any of those trades are, right? Like, I don't know what Kyle Kuzma, Bobby Portis, and a first-round pick is actually going to fetch you. But also, like, if we're talking about a marginal upgrade, like some of the names that have been thrown out there aren't even worth repeating because I don't think it helps the Bucks.
Yeah.
But if that's what we're talking about, that is definitely not, mortgaging your future even further with a first-round pick. That look at the trend this year. Like, what if that becomes a trend of this is how the Bucks are going to be playing go forward, and that could be the number one pick that you're trading away. But also, as we've seen and we've just talked about, like, Kyle Kuzma is actually pretty important to this team because of what he's able to do defensively, how he plays downhill, and again, the numbers when he's been on the floor with your best player been drastically different from where it was a year ago. So I'm not saying he's untradeable, but all these trades that people have worked up, like, I don't know what trade with Kyle Kuzma out there exists that makes you a better team that's, to the point that it's good enough to really matter right now.
Yeah, I mean, if Kuzma goes, you've got to be bringing back a pretty ideal small forward. Cut. Yeah, you just need to. And I don't know. I mean, before the year, I really liked Kuz, and so, whether it's a multiple team deal or if there's some small asset, but like Kuz for RJ Barrett is financially viable, and it gets the Raptors below the tax. And my thought was, like, if the Raptors are, kind of mediocre, that could be a priority, or the Bucks are. Okay, we get a guy who's playable, who does numbers, everything else. They don't seem to mind players who don't shoot historically. And being under the tax is nice. And that ownership group, I mean, didn't want to continue paying Masai Ujiri, like, has not been a very spendy group overall. And, like, on a 4-game losing streak, Barrett's been out. They played okay and not great. I was like, oh, maybe they can, do they do a Trae Young Ewing theory thing here with Barrett? I don't think so. And also, to your point, I don't know. I think dropping RJ Barrett on the Bucks, like, are they way better? Maybe. I don't know if he's really doing that kind of stuff, though. Like, more of I think I've been so focused on these, like, offensive guys. If, like, they need to find this. And, again, like, the half-court offense has been great. RJ Barrett's not going to come in and change our lives defensively or on the glass. So, I don't know. Another guy, I like Dylan Brooks. The idea of Dylan Brooks, I think he is the kind of player who's, like, he is going to make you tougher. He's going to make you stouter defensively. He's going to rebound for his position. People don't like him. I think that's fine. I could get over that if he helped the Bucks win games. But Phoenix is good now. And Phoenix is not rebuilding. Phoenix can't rebuild, really. So I don't really see a way where that happens unless they're just really enamored with Kuzma or Portis or both. The, like, Levine stuff, I'm like, no. I mean, with everything we've talked about, they're the best shooting team in the league, and they can't win games. So what? They'll be an even better shooting team that still can't win games because Levine's not helping you defensively or on the glass either. So if the player isn't helping you defensively or on the glass, I kind of don't get it at this point. If Kuzma's going, especially. Portis, I do think, I don't know exactly, I can't put my finger on exactly what, but something about the way they played differently this year. Maybe it's the more athleticism, maybe that because they're just setting up post touches less for everyone not named Giannis. It just feels like they don't get enough from him most nights offensively. And if he's going to have 12 points on 10 shots or on 8 shots or whatever, and we know the defense has never been great, and right now it's like, it's at a nadir. I mean, there was a possession. Cam Whitmore didn't even do a move. He just kind of like you would on 2K, kind of just like took an extra dribble toward the baseline and just went around. And it looked like the Portis the controller had died, and he dunked it with emphasis, with oomph. And you just can't afford that if you're just like getting 12 points on okay shooting. On the other end, there's been a couple explosive Portis games. The Portland game where, ironically, he was incredible. He was their best player. And they made a starting lineup switch at halftime after starting Sims. And it wasn't Portis. And by the time he got back in the game was over. Which I was at that game with my dad. And he went crazy. He's like, how do you take Bobby Portis out of this game? I was like, well, the defense. He's like, well, no one's defending. And I was like, well, you know what? You're right. Jeremy Grant has 30. I can't argue with you on this one. Anyway, that's an aside. That's been bad. So, I mean, if maybe turning Portis into a player who fits the roster better, it just feels like, I don't know. It feels like they're bigs generally. You brought up Turner. I wanted to ask you about him too. Because, like, the Miami game, he played a little differently, but also it just kind of felt like they remembered he existed. And it just feels like for large stretches of the season, both with the rotations, I mean, last night's game, great example. I mean, Turner doesn't come in until there's 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. He didn't have a good shooting game. You look at the plus minus, they did win his minutes. Like, he does a lot for them defensively, especially I think they've kind of dropped back a little more. He's been way up at the screen less, which I think has suited him much better defensively. They were really asking him to play like Draymond Green, and he's a mobile center, but he's not Draymond Green. But just like the minutes, the rotations, he sits for really long stretches. He usually comes back in. It feels like very late in fourth quarters when they could probably use him earlier. But offensively, it just feels like there's a lot of games where, like, you know, he'll get some trail threes, he'll get some corner threes, but there's nothing ran for him. They're not setting him up to do anything. And the Miami game was like a breath of fresh air. Like, hey, this guy's skilled. Like, I don't think he can break guys down off the dribble. He tries sometimes. It doesn't go well. Let's leave that in the past. Let's leave that in 25. But he can pass. He can post a little bit. He's got nice touch. He can shoot. And I just wonder, like, all that they gave up for him. And it was a lot. I mean, you waive and stretch a top 75 player of all time and the big contract. The Pat Connaughton salary dump, which was very expensive, I think, for the contract that it was. And I just think you give all that up, and I feels like you should get more out of that guy. Turner hasn't played amazing. I'm not saying it's all on the coaching staff, but also, I don't know, do you feel like he's been underutilized in addition to not always playing the best on either end?
Yeah, and I think, you know, last night, too, against the Wizards was a rough game for him defensively, which was a pretty big surprise with who the Wizards were throwing out there, especially in the paint. But
yeah,
who would have thought we'd be sitting here, number one, the day after a loss to the Wizards, but also saying, like, you know who the best big on the floor was last night? It was Marvin Bagley III in a game that featured Giannis and Miles Turner. I think, too, in the Heat game, what stood out was something that we talked about at the time that they brought him in kind of like going through the checklist of areas that you think Miles Turner is better than Brook Lopez was, you know, I remember seeing quite a bit last year, in the last few years for that matter, in all these matchups with the Pacers and even games that you'd watch of the Pacers that didn't feature the Bucks, where Miles Turner will hunt mismatches and take advantage of those. And that's just something that the Bucks offense has not done, not just with Brook, with anyone really, unless it was an absolute necessity. And you saw that again in the Heat game of like, all right, we're going to run this two-man action. And if you're going to put a guard on him, we're just going to keep going into him and he's going to score in the paint. It's just been strange, like all these individual players too. Like when we talk about the first 5 games of the season, and like I will cite sample size and its importance every single day. So I realize I am contradicting myself here. But those first 5 games, save for the Wizards, those were good opponents that you faced. And you went 4-1 and you looked good. And the metrics were good, right? You were, I think, 8th in offense and 9th or 10th in defense.
Yeah.
Miles Turner looked like an elite rim protector. He had double-digit blocks through all of those games and beyond. Your defense, Ryan Rollins, think about all the individual plays. And I think we've seen him kind of return to form there. And that's not even a knock on Ryan. It was clear to see when you were telling him be all of our offense. Of course, his defense is going to suffer. But it's just been like Jekyll and Hyde for all this team. And I think Miles Turner represents that of like what happened in those first 5 games where, you know, the offense wasn't there and they weren't featuring him. So I think if anything, that's where you would say, look, this has consistently been there of why aren't we utilizing this? It does lend to a larger conversation though of, and I frankly don't have the answer. If like we've leaned into all of this, you touched on it earlier, shooting and the importance of it. But like, are we sure now 20 some games into a season, like, are we sure this is going to work enough where it's essentially 5 out, where you're going Giannis and 4 shooters because, you know, you're not going to get any offensive rebounds in a game, which I suppose the devil's advocate there is like, well, if you're the number 1 effective field goal percentage team, what offensive rebounds are there to be had? But as we've seen, it's just on the other end of the floor that instead of we just need 4 shooters around Giannis, like how Kyle Kuzma plays when he's playing good and cutting and off-ball movement, which again was all there through the first 5 games of the season. Like maybe that's equally as important, if not more important, than just surrounding your best player that gets into the paint with shooters because of what it means on the other end of the floor.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think they were just insulated from it in how much I think Drew did. And then I think Lopez on the defensive glass. I think my stance in the past with the Bucks in the offensive rebounding, and you do make a good point, although I think offensive rebound percentage would account for, even if you're a good shooting team, you could still grab a lot of your misses. Yeah. I'm not an expert in all of it, but like they're 19th in defensive rebound percentage. And I was okay with the trade-off if it's like, all right, we're last or near the bottom in offensive rebound. But if you grab almost all of your
team in defense,
right, you get back, you grab your own rebounds, like it kind of nets out. Like, okay, we're not getting extra possessions, but we're not giving them. So then if our offense is good and our defense is okay or better, you still win a lot because the possessions are roughly equal. I mean, there's obviously always going to be the random high turnover games. And when the Bucks have one now, it just feels like completely insurmountable because, they're not getting offensive or defensive rebounds. So 19th in defensive rebound percentage and legitimately 30th in offensive rebound percentage behind the Kings, the Thunder, ironically the Thunder, I wouldn't have guessed that one, who are 20-1. Oh my God. The Mavericks, the Wizards, the Bulls. I didn't expect the Thunder to be here. Maybe the missing thing does take part of it, but I would guess they're 6th in defensive rebound. So they're kind of where the Bucks were, way back when. I mean, they're a little better, of course, but in terms of get the other team's misses, even if you don't get your own. The Bucks aren't doing either, and the fouls. So there's been a lot of consternation about someone after the Knicks game said it was my fault, as Bucks media, of course, the voice of all of us. That's not true. Because I don't call out the refs enough, and none of us do, Justin. So it is our fault, actually, that the Bucks are 9-13, so we should take some ownership here, just like the coaching staff, the players in the front office should. But we talked a little bit about this. I don't think there is a grand conspiracy. I really don't. I think the free throw disparity is what it is because, one, the Milwaukee teams do get a little less free throws. The Lakers do get a little more free throws. That's a historic thing. That goes back a long way. I don't think maybe that's a light conspiracy. I don't know. I do think that's kind of true. I don't think there's anything different than normal about that, is what I'll say, because here's why. The Bucks are not good defensively, and they're not good on the glass, so they are just fouling a lot. You foul when you're not good defensively or when you're really aggressive, but when you're not good defensively is when you really notice it, and the Bucks give up a lot of driving lanes. I mean, I was watching that Portland game. Jeremy Grant has been cooked for 3 years, and he was just slicing through with no resistance. And the Bucks lose guys on the perimeter too. That doesn't always lead to fouls, and the rebounding. I mean, when someone comes down with an offensive rebound, that's a big foul opportunity as well, right? You get hacked trying to go back up, or someone cuts in and gets hacked because now you're distracted and your defense is all messed up when you give up an offensive rebound. And on the other end, Giannis is a great foul drawer whose numbers are a little down. Nobody else really is. I think Rollins will get a better whistle. I think KPJ is someone who can draw fouls. They obviously have barely had him this year. Nobody else goes and draws all that much contact. They have a lot of players who are more jump shooters. And this takes me back to the conversation around the 21 finals when we would lecture, I would lecture Suns people of like, oh, the free throw disparity, this is rigged, blah, blah, blah. Like, one team has a guy who's going down through contact, finishing at the rim. And the other team has 2 elite jump shooters and a lot of spacers. Like, you're just not going to shoot the same free throws. There is also a league-wide trend of free throws are just way up. Like, the percentage of points coming from free throws is way up across the league. Yeah. It's not just the Lakers guys. Everybody is giving up more. Some of it is how they're calling the game. Some of it is I think teams are trying to copy Oklahoma City and be aggressive, but when you don't have the multiple all-world defenders, that just means you foul a lot. And teams are trying to pick up full court like Indiana, which also, you get beat, you run ragged, you foul. There's a lot going on bigger than I think just the Bucks, but when you look at it from just the Bucks perspective, I do think it kind of just shows you some of their weaknesses, some of this overall conversation we've been having of that they're so focused on hitting open threes, they're not doing enough else on either end. And I think this deep into the season, even though you have some without Giannis, it just feels very clear that you just can't have that approach anymore because you're having the success with the shooting and it's not working. And it's now time to pivot, both I think in roster and in how you put together lineups.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't expect, if we do see a hard pivot here, we're not going to see anything for a little bit yet. As you mentioned, when guys become tradable, not just with the Bucks, outside of this team. But I mean, also there's a big elephant in the room too of like, what does this mean for the future of this team, and what does this mean for the next couple of years for the best player that is currently on the roster? We're way too early to get into the draft discussion, but it is at least worth noting of like, well, at least the Pelicans are a disaster this year too, that if this does end up being a worst case scenario season for the team, you will at least get a pretty good draft pick this summer to replenish there. But I mean, I just think you need to lean into what has worked so far on both ends of the floor. And honestly, I'm glad you brought up the free throws too, because like you see a lot of let's just set it straight. This isn't a league directive to like, let's get Giannis out of Milwaukee and we're just going to give the Bucks a terrible whistle. They don't have guys, as you just pointed to, that draw fouls routinely. And a lot of that has to do with, if you're the more aggressive team, you are going to be rewarded for that by getting to the free throw line. They get paint touches from Ryan Rollins and Giannis. I think you could make a case neither of those two players have a very strong whistle, and it should be much better than it is. But that's basically it. Like Kyle Kuzma will cut. Kyle Kuzma will get to the rim in transition, and he's the other guy. Like he's number 2 on your team in fouls drawn and getting to the free throw line. But that's not like elite company that you have in terms of guys that are getting to the free throw line and creating points there. And the other problem is, this has nothing to do with the officials, but they're not making free throws. Yeah. And I know Doc has been asked about it and said, well, what do you want me to do? Tell the guys, hey, we should consider hitting these free throws, guys. Like, how is that on Doc Rivers? So this isn't the league trying to get Giannis out of town. This is the way they play. Like, if you're taking a lot of threes, you're not getting those free throw attempts because of where your shot selection is coming from. And defensively, look, I'm not saying all these calls have been great, because we can single out a handful of them. You go back to that Rollins call at midcourt against the Cavs and some other ones where Jericho's flagrant last night, and you're like, well, I've seen the same thing on Giannis, and that's not called. But that
part of it has been the flagrant differential is ridiculous. That's the Giannis was that the Giannis when he got his arm pulled, and it's like that's
by Mikal Bridges.
You encourage guys to do that, you're going to get his arm pulled out of the socket. That has to be a flagrant every time. That part, it's been, I think, the worst of it to me.
But you're undersized. Yeah. You're committing fouls. So, like, that is your other big problem of why, more than anything, like, that should be what the data tells you is, like, look, this doesn't work to play smaller. We tried it for a quarter of the season, and the numbers yielded a disaster. On the defensive end, our offense was great, but great. What did that get us? Like, we're not winning these games, so we just have to play bigger. We have to play with more size, and you have to play with more force. That is the only way you're going to turn around those free throw numbers.
So the one player who really did that in the Wizards loss, the bright spot of it, and I guess we'll save the silver lining for last, was Kevin Porter Jr., who in his I don't think he played his full minutes load against the Nets. I mean, it was the conflating factor of the Nets being the Nets as well, but in a real competitive game, unfortunately for the Bucks, had 30 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals. I thought, obviously, the 30 points stands out. That's not going to be an every game thing. He is a player who takes a lot of shots that are, I don't want to say not sustainable, but there's just high variance on some of the threes, but also like the mid range, and he really had it going from there. Some of the stuff is sustainable. I thought his defense looked great, and I saw the vision of like, okay, even if you start them together, 48 minutes of him and Rollins bothering ball handlers. Like, you're getting dunks out of that. That is sustainable. Yep. I mean, if he pokes the ball out and has it in open court, he's fast. He's going to go dunk the ball. That's great. Overall, I thought he had a great game, Kevin Porter Jr. And I was open to the 2-point guard lineup just with nothing else seeming to work. And again, it's worked, but it's been 2 bad teams. Rollins hadn't had his 2 best games. He had early foul trouble that took away his first stint that would have been just him running the offense and KPJ off. I hate that coaching adjustment when you do that much, because he ended with 2 fouls. So it's like you limited his minutes artificially. It was 5 minutes. Cole Anthony was a +0. It didn't lose them the game by any means. That's kind of an aside. But I think this can work. I think it can work for both players. But I am curious, do you think they have the right three for this? Because the minutes have been good so far. But I do think even though KPJ is a good guard rebounder, they probably need a good rebounder period in there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's Green, but I'm not sure if Kuzma, KPJ could both have a bad shooting night, then do you get too crunchy? Like, what are your thoughts on this starting five? And, do you think it's going to be sustainable? I do think it's pretty easy, though, to say, you kind of have to just figure it out with the fit. But, like, KPJ and Rollins have just been clearly two of your best five at worst players, and they just have to play more.
Yeah, I think, to me, so right now, I would go with it, as we discussed, the starting five of a front court of Giannis, Miles Turner, and Kuzma, and then Rollins and KPJ in the backcourt. The tricky part with it is I don't really love bringing both AJ and Gary Trent Jr. off the bench because it feels like, number one, it's duplicative, but also it feels like one of those guys should be on the floor at all times with Giannis. And by the numbers this year, I'd say that one guy is AJ.
Yeah.
But we're also, as we've discussed, in the state of like, well, we got to try something and figure it out and see if this shakes things up here. I wonder too, like, the longer you let Cole Anthony just kind of get out of his own head and go with, we got these two guys, we'll find spots to bring you in and try to like build him back up by that route. If he does start to yield you some results and plays like, maybe not necessarily like what we saw against the Raptors earlier this season, but at least isn't what we've seen in a handful of other games here. But that's what I would go with because of the defense. And, the same point of like, I don't really love bringing both AJ and Gary Trent off the bench. I also don't, I just feel like those are your two best in that position on ball defenders and can give you the most opportunities defensively to turn defense into offense. So as we've said through much of this, like, to me, the defense is the most important part right now because it's been abysmal. And there's a number of factors for why. You're fouling, you're not rebounding, you haven't done a good job of defending the ball. Rollins and KPJ are two guys that have shown they can at least stay in front of the ball. So I would just ride that for now and see, look, if we lean into more of a defensive lineup where we still have guys that can score, especially if KPJ is going to continue to shoot 70% on three and 60% from the field, great. Then all the defense in the world, that and Giannis should be enough offense. That's, I think, to me, when we talked about what's the fix for this, there isn't a quick fix, but that to me is what I would look at and just say, we think there's an opportunity for this to be a really good defensive lineup and a lineup that can secure the ball. Let's try that, even if it means our offense that has surprisingly been middle of the pack just because of how abysmal it was with Giannis out for those stretch of games. Even if that takes a step backward, fine, but the defense needs to take like two big jumps forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I think that should be the foundation of pretty much any Giannis team. I think the Dame teams are an obvious exception because of what Dame is, but they've had their most success defense first. And I think the other thing, I don't know if we've mentioned, they're also, I believe, last or toward the very bottom of the league in transition points added. Yeah. Which that just hasn't been a strength of their team for years now. And they have what should be the best transition weapon in basketball. They just don't get into it. And so it doesn't help their team.
I'll say too, well, I was just going to quickly say, I think we saw this last night, but I remember after the Nets game, one of my bigger takeaways was, boy, I don't know if like some of the staggering that you do, I don't really think it works to have KPJ play with Bobby because of the contrasting styles that they're going to have here, that he wants to get up and down the floor. And I think Bobby, you touched on it earlier, but he's been much better. Like early in the season, I remember a couple of stretches. I think one was in the Raptors game and maybe the Warriors game where there was the Bobby minutes and it would just be like one touch and a quick shot. And you were trying to like, this isn't how this team has been playing. He's gotten better at getting away from that.
Screening more.
Yeah, but you can still see, like, I don't think it fits with KPJ because he just wants to go and get up and down the floor and find lobs for his bigs. Like, he's gotten Giannis a ton of easy looks so far. that's not Bobby's game. So I wonder if part of the staggering is, all right, when KPJ is on the floor, it's Giannis, and when Ryan is on the floor without, those guys, it's Bobby. The tricky part there is we've seen Ryan be the guy that's pulled along with Giannis earlier, because if he's going to shoot like this, you want one of KPJ or Giannis on the floor at all times. And that's what makes it tricky, is the way you stagger that, it's kind of tough to avoid him playing with Bobby.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing where Kuzma starting could actually help, is they end up with these bench groups where it's Kuzma, Bobby, Sims, because you feel like you need another big out there with Bob to guard the rim. But then the offense with Sims and Kuzma is just pretty untenable. I mean, it's just not going to work. And the plus minus bears this out. Sims in 181 minutes, the Bucks have lost those by 115 points. Like, they've just been terrible when he plays. I'm not blaming him for that. Some of it is lineup construction, but also we just know he's a limited offensive player. And
there's clearly something there, right? And even his ability to defend outside of the paint and stay in front of guys. But it's just like, I'm not saying he's a bad player, but it's like, from the makers of Andre Jackson Jr.
I know,
comes Jericho Sims.
I mean, I think I've said, like, it's like if Andre Jackson Jr. was a real center, which is kind of where you almost have to be with that skill set, and didn't try to be Magic Johnson, which is the other thing about Andre. He hit Miles, I think it was Turner, in the face with a pass, and I was like, that's not anyone's fault. Like, it took the Showtime Lakers a while to get used to Magic. It takes a while to get used to a player like that. I would play him a little more, though, to be honest. Even with the limitations. Sims and Jackson Jr. But it's hard to play both. It's really hard to play both. I wanted to ask you about the plus-minus demon of the team, derogative, Gary Trent Jr., who is down to minus 124 in 620 minutes. And we did a whole pod about this. And at the time, Rohan and I were like, I don't know, is this kind of random? Like, is this things just stacking up this way? Like, Trent hadn't been great at that point, and he's actually probably been a little better since even. But it's like, hasn't been terrible. He just kind of does his thing. And he was a team low minus 12 against the Wiz in 30 minutes. And I think I've determined the reason is it's not really his fault, but the changing team and the changing league, he just doesn't do the things we've talked about that they need from players. And he had 1 rebound in 30 minutes. In his last, someone said this to me, like 8 games, he has some very low amount of rebounds in all of those minutes. And he's played quite a bit in that time. And if you just look at like the per game averages, I mean, he rebounds per game less than Cole Anthony, who is 5'11" and plays a lot less. He rebounds way less than Sims, who's a center, but plays a lot less. Like, he just doesn't give you anything on the boards. He's not been a big assist player. He had no assists in 30 minutes against the Wizards. So, and he's not defensively, like, he's kind of a splash plays guy. He had a block in that game. The steals against Kevin Durant were incredible in that Wizards game. Kevin Durant certainly got him back quite a few times down the stretch of that game. We know he kind of subsists on big plays, play to play. I don't think he's really helped them defensively. He's shooting the ball well. He's one of their best shooters. He's one of the best corner shooters in the league. I think he's kind of a microcosm, though, of the whole team. Like, that's great. That's valuable. I'm not saying, terrible contract or anything else. He's not been a bad player. But, like, he is probably the epitome of, we are too deep in shooting and we're not doing enough else. And I think because there is so much of that already on the team, his minutes are just not going well because that's not what they need. They need more of whatever Kuzma gives you, whatever Andre Jackson Jr. gives you, even if those guys aren't as good, and they're certainly not as good offensively or shooting the ball specifically. They're helping you more right now because you need that other stuff.
He's with him on the floor, I think they have like a 121, 122 defensive rating in their -9 or -10 in net rating. They've been really good offensively, and I think that's the other thing that would surprise people is kind of similar to last year. He started really cold. Now he's hitting shots again, and you look up the numbers like, wow, I didn't realize that's his shooting percentage this year. Last year, though, this caught me by surprise because I just remember it being so much better. And granted, part of it was we looked at the back half of the year. But with him on the floor last year, it was a 118 defensive rating, and they were basically net neutral. They were +1 in net rating. So, like, we had this notion too of like, well, everything works with him and Dame and Giannis. And then towards the end of the year, well, Gary Trent Jr., KPJ, the sample size that we heard about from John Horst and how this group worked, it just hasn't. He's undersized. He is a gambler, and sometimes it pays off. It really pays off when you have solid defenders around him, that he can come through with those steals and trigger loose balls and create some transition opportunities. But again, with the way that they've utilized these lineups, you haven't had that, save for the first couple games of the season when you started him. If he's playing with the bench-heavy lineups, everything. It's not just the defense, but everything's been a disaster with that second unit. So I think that really kind of minimizes his impact. And, you go back to the summer and I think to your point of what he maybe doesn't do as well as some other players, despite the ability to score and do more than just catch and shoot. I think we're seeing why for 2 straight years, this guy was available basically for the veteran minimum. And I remember, I forget who it was, but a pretty prominent NBA podcaster talking about Gary Trent Jr. and the signing that the Bucks made. And again, if you have him for the minimum, great. That's a high value contract because of the potential upside that is there. But I remember this notion too, which I believe too, and now I think we're starting to see of why would I want to pay Quentin Grimes $20 million or X amount of dollars when I can get Gary Trent Jr. for the minimum, which like on the surface, like, sure, yeah, they'll probably score around the same amount of points if they get the same touches. But as we've seen, it's because Quentin Grimes can defend, and Quentin Grimes not only defend up, he can rebound, and it's the other things that he does, which, again, it's not just Gary Trent Jr. It's just you're not getting all of that from up and down the roster, basically everyone but 3 guys?
Yeah, I think it's 100% true. And I think this is really like, I'm guilty of this before this season. Like you're looking at player stats and the advanced or even just the basic, and it's like, what do you look at? What's the points? Maybe the steals and blocks, but I think all defensive stats are kind of flawed. You kind of just have to listen to what people say and watch them. But it's like the points, the assists, the shooting percentages. Those are like the raw numbers that I think, at least I was guilty of, like, wow, that's what this player, this is a great fit. And it just glossed over the rebounding. And I think going forward, we just can't, whether it's Brooks, some of the other, like not having Drew Holiday, I think, although their point guards, I think, are okay rebounding the ball. Chris, prime Chris was a very good rebounder, especially at the 3, which he normally was. I don't even know if Chris would come back on a buyout at this point. The team would have to be a little better. That's obviously something people talk about. I was like, I don't know. You just beat the Bucks, man. Maybe he'd say, I don't want to get bought out and come over here. I don't know. But yeah, that's something I've just been thinking about. And they just clearly
I don't, since you brought it up, I don't think Chris is getting traded. Like Bucks fans have seen him twice this year, and like he's looked okay to good in those 2. If you watch the rest of it, it's been a different story. So I don't think you'll find a trade partner that it is a buyout, but for a buyout where anybody can have him for the minimum, there's going to be contending teams and better teams that look at him and say, like, this guy can help run our offense with the second unit and give us some of those minutes for a playoff run.
Yeah, and I think, legitimately, I do think it'd be like, because hey, great memories there, but I think the ship would have to be righted significantly by February or March or whenever that happens.
Chris comes full circle and signs with the Pistons.
I'm coming home, but not the one you thought. And I also, I think this has probably died down a bit, but the romantic idea of like, this is the small forward the Bucks need. Chris is not fixing this stuff either. Would love to have him off the bench. He'd be a great stabilizing force. They're thin at forward. We know the deal here, I think, or we should. It's, the injuries, the age, everything. Like he's not going to come in for, I think, any good team and be an elite starting option anymore. I think we're just past that.
It was unfortunately a trade you had to make.
Yeah.
And whether or not you want to criticize, again, he's been good this year, but if you want to criticize, got to get something better than Kyle Kuzma. Like in a perfect world, I would agree with you because of how important Chris Middleton was to your franchise, but that's not the guy that you traded. You traded a guy that was coming off of 3-4 years of inconsistency because of his health and injuries, and a $30 million contract that it was not a positive asset that you had to attach things to. and the second apron stuff, all of it.
Yeah.
Like, again, you don't get Kevin Porter Jr. if you don't make that trade because of the cash that was included in the deal.
Sims
or maybe
too.
Jericho was the cash
Yeah,
deal.
Jericho.
So I think, but yeah, like you can't do that. You are in absolutely dire straits. I mean, we saw they waived and stretched Dame, but you're in very dire straits if you come into the offseason and Dame tears his Achilles and you still have Chris and you're a second apron team then. Like,
yeah,
sure, you can get out of it with the wave and stretch, but you still have to figure out what are we doing with the rest of this group. So
there's no Turner. I mean, for as up and down as it's been, that's now with if maybe Bobby's playing better, maybe he's not, but maybe Bobby's not around. I mean, Brooke is certainly still gone, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could wave and stretch Dame, but to your point, like you still have an extra $11 million because of the Kuz deal versus Chris's deal. That
Chris going up, Kuz going down, which was a big part of it too.
Yeah,
and also I think that deal nothing's going to age great for the Bucks unless they start winning. But the fact that all these injuries, AJ Johnson still not cracking the Wiz rotation, obviously the pick stunk, and I think that's one where the Bucks are really going to feel and regret that draft in particular. Those two top picks, one of them's not playing for the Wizards, one of them you just cut and is now back in the G League on his third different G League stint. But I mean, I loved Keyshawn George. I'm not going to sit here and go I'm a draft guru, but a lot of people love Terrence Shannon. I think AJ Mitchell went out. I mean, there's any of those players makes obviously a significant difference right now. And to blow both of those picks is bad. But you did use the Johnson pick as currency to make that deal. And it's not looking like you're going to regret giving up on a Hall of Fame player. We'll see. He's young. A lot of time left. But it's not off to a great start so far for him in D.C. The last thing I'll say is just as we talk about this stuff, Gary Harris has a minus 9.8 net on Andre Jackson Jr. minus 7. Sims is minus 29. So these defensive guys have not been instantly working for the Bucks. I will say, though, a lot of the times they've been thrown in some pretty junk lineups, or it'll be like, we're going to throw these guys in because we can't stop anybody. The other team is rolling. There's injuries. Like, there's not. I'm just that to say it sounds so easy, but the results haven't been great. I think it's worth exploring more. But I don't think, to your point earlier, I don't think it's going to be like we played Ajax and some of the Bobby and Trent minutes, and suddenly we're a 50-win team pace again.
Yeah, and I'll say, I mean, I think I'm not a huge fan of the plus, and I'm not saying like you are citing this as gospel. Yeah. I borderline hate the plus minus number. Sometimes it matches the eye test, but it's so heavily dependent on who's on the floor with you. Yeah. The Gary Harris numbers are the surprising ones because like that's another guy that I feel like, wow, we all owe a pretty big apology to, because I think Gary Harris has been good, really good for the Bucks so far this season, and a lot of his metrics I just kind of chalk up to he's been in a lot of the all bench lineups, but his defense has been terrific for this team. Really good. If anything, you'd love to try to get him to hunt some more shots, because I like, how many times have we seen Gary Harris essentially having to play the 3 with some of these defensive lineups, and bigger guys seeing, okay, I got this guy matched up on me, I'm going to go to work. And he just, because he knows where to be, how to position himself in quick hands, he just takes the ball from them and creates opportunities.
Yeah, he's one. Do we have any idea the injury there? If it was Achilles soreness, which you hear the A word, that's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and what did was it calf soreness that he had coming in
earlier in the season? Yeah.
That he was going to miss some time.
Yep.
So, yeah. I mean, at least he's not your starting 2 guard, but he's been very nice for the team so far this season.
Yeah, it is odd. He's at really bad net with Giannis on too, which I expected that would be better, but it's been 47 minutes, so you can't, I don't think, draw too many conclusions. The watching him, I agree. I said I'd put my signature big like John Hancock on the Gary Harris apology form, because I was like, what is his player option? Why do these agent favors, everything else? He looked great. I mean, I've been bemoaning they don't have anyone who plays like Wes Matthews. He was giving them some of that, like, wow, his arms are so active. You just wish
he was like 3 inches taller.
I know. But he was helping. I think still, even with those numbers, he was helping. I was a big fan of his. Hopefully he's okay. And I think this one, the last one I wanted to ask you, just injuries, just talking to people around the team. I keep getting questions about Prince. Clearly it seems long-term, neck surgery. I don't know if it's long-term enough that they'd be able to apply for the disabled player exception. I also, frankly, don't think it would really matter. It gives you half of his salary. He's on basically a minimum. Yeah, it wouldn't. Yeah. It doesn't give you a roster spot. You need 4 players out long-term for that. The Pacers got that earlier. That's the – now I'm forgetting what that's called. There's another thing that's not the disabled player exception. I don't know if they'll apply for either. It does. My assumption, though, has been like probably months. Like it'll be a while. The term they used was indefinitely. Is there any kind of, I guess, like update with a team on or around the team on like what that's like, or is it kind of just like let him heal? That's a very serious thing.
There's been no updates from the team. I've heard some things that I probably am not at liberty to share, but I wouldn't count on his return being anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's with having less info than you, but just like seeing how this went with Lopez
surgery in general doesn't sound good. Yeah,
a serious thing. So they miss him right now for sure. Again, just like a bigger player who was one of the best shooters in the league.
Think about those statements of like, man, they've really missed Kevin Porter Jr. and Taurean Prince.
That has been where we've been at for sure. All right, I've kept you a really long time. I appreciate it as always, Justin. Let me know if there's anything else that we forgot to say, or otherwise where people can find you and your content all over the place.
I think people have probably found enough of me. You can hear me daily on Locked On Bucks, as you mentioned, on the Bucks Radio Network for all 82 games. And then if you are so inclined on Blue Sky and Twitter as well to find me there, I think it's Justin Garcia, NBA.
There we go. Nice and easy. Go follow Justin if you're somehow not already. Follow me at Ty Windisch. Follow the pod at Eurostep Pod or Podcast. One of the two. You'll find it on Twitter. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, wherever you're watching or listening, both to us and to Locked On Bucks. Check out the radio broadcast for more of Justin. He does a great job on there. It's always nice when I'm driving or just in the mood for it to flip that on for additional coverage. Thanks very much for watching or listening. Pod Random, and we will talk to you next time.